This is a WDG dashboard. It allows you to view several statistics and data in a clear visual way, with graphs and charts. It can provide you with a business view, as the data that can be displayed on the dashboard is generated by the execution of bots. In essence, all the important information regarding the process you automate with WDG Automation is safely stored for later viewing. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's take a deeper look into how this dashboard you're seeing right now came to be. This is a script for a sales chatbot. This was created for the express purpose of demonstrating how values generated by running an automation process can be displayed on the dashboard. This bot basically offers the client a selection of items that can be purchased, as well as payment options and such. We can monitor the amount sold of each item, as well as the payment options, and display all that data on a dashboard for monitoring purposes. We'll come back to the script later on. First, we need to set things up on the WDG web client. We need to start by creating a project on the web client. We can do that by clicking on Configuration on the web client side menu, then click on Projects. Here we can create new projects or edit any existing ones. Let's create a new project by clicking on the Create Project button. Now on the project setup screen, we can name our projects and also give it a description. It's good practice to give very elucidating names to projects with no ambiguities. We will give a very simple name to this project: Chatbot Sales. For the description, ideally, we would want to make the project's function very clear here by being precise and to the point, using just the right amount of words. But since this is just for demonstration purposes, we'll just write the project's name here, so as to not lose much time. You can already see the project we've just created on the list of projects for this tenant. Now we need to create counters, and for that, let's click on Counters on the web client's side menu. A counter is used to store the important values generated by a bot execution. You can think of them as variables in a script, used to store values you can later use for whatever purpose. In the case of counters, the values stored in them are used to compose dashboards. When creating a bot, you can specify the data you want a counter to receive when the bot runs. We'll take a look at how to do that a bit later on. On this screen, you can see all counters created on this tenant, as well as some information about each of them. You can see here the project a given counter is assigned to, as well as its name, the last user who modified it, and so on. First, let's click on Create Counter. This is the counter setup screen, where you can name your counter, give it a description, and choose which project it will be assigned to. The process here is very similar to when we've created the project just a few moments ago. Let's name this counter Chatbot Customer Service, give it a description, and assign it to the project we've created. We have to repeat this step for every counter we want to create. Since we need to use a counter for each data piece we want to monitor, we need to do this a few more times. Let's speed things up here. Now that we have the counters, let's go into the dashboard by clicking on Dashboard on the side menu. Here we can see all the dashboards created for this tenant. Right now, we're in Viewer mode, where we can only view and interact with dashboards. Let's click on Edit in Designer at the top right of the screen to go into the Designer mode, where we can create and edit dashboards. Now that we're on Designer mode, let's try creating a new dashboard. We need to go to the Dashboard menu first by clicking on the hamburger button on the left side menu. Now we just click on New. The first step in creating a dashboard is giving it a name. It's not mandatory to name a dashboard according to the project name, but in this case, let's name our dashboard Chatbot Sales, same as our project. Next, we need to choose a data source for our dashboard. We can pick among workflows and workflow batches as our data source, but we'll take a look at workflow on a later video. So let's choose the default data source. We now have a brand new dashboard with no graphs or charts on it. Let's start playing around with it. To the left side, we have the item box, which is where we can find all the elements we can insert on our dashboard. The item box is divided into 3 sections: Common, Filter, and Layout. On the Layout section, we can use groups to organize our dashboard's contents within groups. While it is not mandatory to always insert graphs inside groups, since we can just insert them directly onto the dashboard, let's try creating some groups to see how that works. To insert any element on the dashboard, simply click on it, and it will show up on the dashboard to the right. As we inserted the group here, you can see some symbols right in the middle here. This is an alternative way to insert elements on the dashboard. Instead of picking an element from the item box, let's just click on one right here. Let's try inserting a chart by clicking on the chart icon. Once a chart is inserted, we can configure it. This can be done by either clicking on the gear icon on the chart's toolbar, or if the chart is still unconfigured, we can click here to start binding this chart to data. You can now see the binding menu to the left here. This is where we can configure dashboard elements. In this case, we're now going to configure this chart. Let's start from the bottom by clicking on Data and Filtering. Here we can choose the data source for this chart. We have a few options here, but let's focus on the top of the list, namely the jobs and the counters. Jobs refer to the data regarding the execution process itself, such as when the bot started running, how long it took to run the whole process, the scheduling ID, and such. Counters refer to what we were talking about and creating a while ago. This is what we're going to use to create our chart here. Now let's bind some data to this chart by clicking on Add Values. Here we can see all the data fields available from the data source we chose. So let's start by going to Counters, then Counter ID in Count mode. What this does basically is count all the IDs from each element contained in a counter. Since every ID is unique, this essentially produces a summary of the number of elements contained in each counter. This is similar to using the count function on SQL. Now we have defined what we want to see on the chart, but we also need an argument, which is how we want to categorize each counter ID displayed on the chart. So let's click on Add Argument, then we click on Counters again, and then Counter Name. This will basically categorize the amount of each counter ID by the counter name, and you can already see this take effect on the chart. However, as you can see, we have more counters than we created a while ago. That's because, by default, the chart is using every counter ever created on this tenant. Let's set up some filter criteria for this chart by clicking on Click to Set Filter Criteria. This is where we can filter exactly what we want to show up on this chart. Let's set the filter criteria in a way that only the counter named Chatbot Customer Service will be displayed. Let's save this filter, and as you can see, the chart is now empty. That's because we have just created the Chatbot Customer Service counter a little while ago. There are no values contained in it. We will come back to this chart later on to see the results of running a bot on the values displayed here. For now, let's continue setting up elements on the dashboard. We will use a different group for each graph and chart we insert here, just so we can identify the dashboard elements more easily. As you can see, we can drag and resize each group so the dashboard is organized in a visually concise manner. On this bottom group here, we're going to use the cards element. We're going to set the filter for this element in a different way. The filter editor is a very powerful tool. It allows us to edit criteria for filtering what is displayed on the element in many ways. For this element, we're going to use multiple conditions while using the OR conditional to display the value of 3 specific counters here. We will continue setting up different kinds of charts and graphs throughout the other groups to compose our dashboard. This takes a little while, so in the interest of time, let's speed things up so we can proceed to the next step. Okay, so for this dashboard, we have the following: a bar chart on group 1, cards on group 2, a pie chart on group 3, another bar chart on group 4, and a pivot grid on group 5. But as you can see, they are all still empty since no values have been attributed to the counters yet. Let's do something about that. But first, let's save everything we have done on this dashboard so far. Now let's go back to that sales chatbot script we've seen at the beginning of the video. As mentioned previously, this script offers options for customers for what they want to buy and how they want to pay. We're going to use this script to assign values to the counters we created on the web client, so we can see these values displayed on the dashboard we configured. We can do that by using the update counter command. The update counter command does exactly that, updates the value of a counter. We need to insert this command on the script appropriately, so it updates the value of the counters we want, when and how we want it. First, we'll navigate to the drinks subroutine. This subroutine handles the chatbot interaction with the user when it's offering drinks. There are 3 drink options: martini, coffee, and water. We'll insert an update counter command under the if statement that is triggered when the user chooses the martini. First, we need to choose the project this update counter command will work with. We can see a list of every project available on the tenant we're using. Let's choose the chatbot sales project. Then we need to type in the name of the counter we want to update with this command. In this case, we're going to update the chatbot martini counter. Then we define the value that will be updated in the counter. Here, we're going to use the value 1. By doing this, every time the martini is chosen by a user during the chatbot interaction, the update counter command will update the chatbot martini counter with +1. This process allows us to count for how many martinis are sold, and we can see that amount displayed on the dashboard later on. We're going to do the same procedure, but now we're going to insert the update counter command under the else if statement that is triggered when the user chooses coffee. The logic here is the exact same as before, only we're going to use a different counter here, namely the chatbot coffee counter, to account for the amount of coffee that is sold. And finally, under the else statement, we're going to update the counter that accounts for the amount of water sold, named chatbot water counter. By now, we are already accounting for each drink type sold, but there is one more counter we want to update while in this subroutine. We're going to use one last update counter command to update the chatbot drinks counter. This counter will be used to account for how many drinks in general are sold, regardless of their kind. This is the basics of how to use the update counter command in a script. We're going to apply the same logic and procedure to the other subroutines, which handle other kinds of sales. This is going to take a few minutes, so let's speed it up again. Okay, now that all the subroutines are set up, there is one less update counter command we need. Right at the end of the main script, we're using the update counter command to update the chatbot customer service counter to account for all the customers the chatbot serves. Now let's try running this chatbot. It's going to ask her name first. Let's try going with Watson. Let's try buying some clothes here. Watson does need some new t-shirts. Let's go with that. And we're paying for this using a credit card. Okay, let's try buying something else. This time, Marta is doing the shopping. And I feel Marta needs a hat. More specifically, a beanie, since it's getting colder lately. Marta is also using a credit card to pay for this purchase. Okay, one more time. Now Lucas needs to buy something too. Lucas is in the mood for something to drink. And he is buying a martini because it has been a long week and he deserves to unwind a bit. Lucas is paying for this using cash. As you can see, every time a purchase is completed, the chatbot goes back to the beginning and starts the process all over again. Every time this process is repeated, the value of the counters we've created are updated by the update counter command, as we have defined. This is going to continue for a while so we can have something to show on the dashboard. Let's skip ahead and see how things have changed over there. Alright, now that we're back on the dashboard, let's take a look at what is being displayed here. On the bar chart contained on Group 1, we can see the number of customers served by the chatbot. Here, we can see that 18 customers have been served by the chatbot. Next up, on the pie chart contained in Group 3, we can see that 60% of the drink sales are martini sales, then 20% of them are coffee sales, and another 20% are water sales. The bar chart on Group 4 is showing us that for the clothing sales, 1 jacket, 2 pants, and 4 t-shirts have been sold. The pivot grid in Group 5 shows us that for the hat sales, 4 beanies, 1 cap, and 1 chef's hat have been sold so far. And finally, the cards down below in Group 2 shows us the total sales for each category: 7 clothes sales, 5 drink sales, and 6 hat sales. As you can see, the dashboard provides us with a business view, which can be an important decision-making support tool. For example, we can see that the martini sales are greatly outnumber the sales for any other kind of drink, so we can try to capitalize on that by pushing for even more martini sales, or try to balance things out by trying to push for more coffee or water sales, maybe by a price reduction. This is only a very small and simple example of what the dashboard can be used for. The possibilities for displaying data are near limitless. For instance, we can also convert one of these elements into another type of element. Let's try converting this pie chart into a bar chart. As you can see, the data displayed here is still the same, only now it's being displayed in a different way. Each kind of graph and chart serves a different purpose. and you are free to choose how you want to view your data with the WDG dashboard. We can also try converting the pivot grid on group 5 into cards. There really is a plethora of possibilities with the dashboard. Now, let's run the chatbot again and skip ahead to see how values change dynamically on the dashboard as new data is provided by the bot execution process. As you can see, now the number of customers served has increased to 41, and all the other elements on the dashboard are also displaying different numbers than we have seen before. Let's try doing one last thing before we wrap things up here. Let's use a filter on this dashboard. First, let's add a new group to insert this filter. As mentioned previously, we could just insert the filter directly onto the dashboard, but doing this does make it easier to demonstrate each element of the dashboard. Here on group 6, we're going to use a list box filter. Configuring a filter is very similar to configuring a graph or a chart. First, we choose the data source for the filter. Then we add a dimension to this filter. We're going to click on Counter Events, then Counter Event Creation Date. By doing this, we have effectively created a date filter. Next, we need to add a hidden dimension to this filter. Hidden dimensions can be used to configure filter criteria. We're going to use the project name for this. Now we go to Data and Filtering, then click to set filter criteria. Now we use the hidden dimension we've just configured, the project name, to have this element work only with the counters and values assigned to the project chatbot sales. Now let's configure the date range we want this filter to work with. There are a lot of choices, but for this filter, we're going to use date hour. We can already see the available dates for the filter. These correspond to the time the bot have been executed and the sales were performed. We're going to set the filter on group 6 as a master filter, so we can affect all the other groups on the dashboard. Now let's go back to viewer mode and play around with this filter. Right now, all the dates are selected, but as we start deselecting some of them, we can see the values on every element on the dashboard change. This is because the elements are only displaying values that correspond to the filter selection. This way, we can choose to view the sales data for specific dates and times, allowing us even further control over the information we see on the dashboard. That about covers the basics of how the WDG dashboard works and how the data is fed to the data sources we can use with it. On the next video, we'll look into workflow using WDG Automation Studio.